Hello, everybody. I hope you guys are doing well. My name is Reyt. I am the negotiation host. Let me start again. Hello. I'm just a little bit worried because I'm looking on LinkedIn and I don't see anybody. Like the stream is not starting, so we're going to see if it starts. But I think all in all, we're just going to record it and we'll see if it starts. All right. Hello and welcome to Master Negotiators. My name is Reyt. I am your host and a negotiation professor at McGill University. Every week, I'm joined by two negotiation experts from diverse backgrounds, such as sales, procurement, management, academia, mediation, arbitration, and even law enforcement. And together, we deliver practical advice that you can apply to your work and your professional life. So today, the topic that we're going to be discussing is negotiating with influence. And as we get started, please drop a comment in the chat to let us know where you're joining us from. I'll start by introducing today's master negotiators. So Pablo Restrepo is a negotiation consultant and professor with over 3 decades of experience working with diverse organizations globally. He's shared his experience at institutions such as Kellogg School of Management at McGill University. Hello, Pablo.
Hello. Thanks
Thank
for
you
having
so
me.
much. Thank you for making time for us. And Vladimir Bushin is a coach specializing in negotiation, influence, and business relationships. He's the founding member of the Cialdini Institute and the founder of the negotiation practice community. He's also recognized as a top negotiation voice on LinkedIn. Hello, Vlad.
Thank you, JN. Pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me here.
Thank you so much for making time for us. So let's start with just a very, very easy question. And so, Pablo, if you want to start, can you tell us what got you interested in negotiation and what keeps you interested about it?
Well, as you know, many things in life, it was an accident. my father, who has strong relationships with a university here called Universidad Los Andes, was invited to a workshop by Roger Fisher, the famous author of Getting to Yes. And
Right.
he was busy, so he gave me his spot. And I did a 3-day workshop with Roger Fisher. And I thought, wow, this is fantastic. This is what I want to do. And very irresponsibly, after the workshop, I started teaching negotiation at the Universidad Los Andes. Really, I just learned on the road. What has kept me in the field? I think it's a fascinating field. It's something you do all the time, and there's such a beauty about working with other people, collaborating with other people with a vision of prosperity. Sorry, to find solution that work for all. So it really is my passion.
And so, what keeps you interested about it?
I think it's I mean, as you gain more experience, you see how powerful negotiation is to help people, reach decisions, joint decisions that can be simple decisions in a daily life, or more transcendental decisions, like when we were helping the Colombian government negotiate a free trade agreement with the United States. So I think is really the impact you can have through negotiation on people's lives.
That's extremely interesting. So what about you, Vlad? What got you interested in negotiation? What keeps you interested about it?
Yeah, it's a very good question, JN. And it's kind of difficult for me to answer because I need to make myself looking vulnerable here, because I started negotiation not because I was good at that, but on the opposite. I was very bad at that, and I struggled. I approached every time I wanted something, I approached it as a transactional thing. I wanted it now. I wanted it as to my liking, and it was a lot of anxiety, and it caused a lot of conflicts. And every time you have a conflict with your colleagues, with your family, with your friends, it's like slamming on the brakes. You have some plans, you have some opportunities, and all of a sudden it's a setback because you have friction, and those conflicts it held me up for a long time. And at some point I was kind of in crisis. I was thinking, like, I need to change it. It's not possible to move forward this way. It will be too slow. I will not take on opportunities that I could take, and I decided to change it, and I started to learn. And first of all, I wanted to learn how to respectfully stand up for myself if somebody is being disrespectful with me. I was concerned a lot about how to build relationships because, I believe that it is the sticking point. And
Right.
later on, I uncovered that yes, building relationship is a sticking point because nothing works without it. So I focused on that, and I took the course on crucial conversations, and I became a certified trainer. Crucial conversations, it's amazing framework. We can talk about this a little bit later. And then I started to learn about negotiation, and then I started to see like, oh, my anxiety goes away. I'm becoming more confident speaking with people. And to answer your second question about why I keep interested in negotiation, think about it. There's everything we do, everything significant we achieve start from word. Word has a lot of power, and we don't realize how much power the word has, and maybe we can only tap into like 10% of its power. Think about that start of the United States, the Declaration of Independence. It starts from
Right.
word. People first need to say something, and then something start to happen. People get united, and it goes to action. And if there is a problem, people send somebody to solve that problem, and that person, like Benjamin Franklin, was sent to France to negotiate support for a young United States to withstand its independence, and it worked. And because they were master of words, they were master of negotiation to facilitate that.
That's really interesting. Thank you so much for sharing, Vlad. And so, Pablo, I have a question for you. Why do you think negotiation is not more popular? Why is it that it's just a niche where in reality everybody negotiates all the time?
That's a really good question, and I think that's one question we struggle with all the time because we have been focusing, of course, negotiating at an individual level is key for everybody. But when you look at corporations, it's fascinating that you rarely find an organization that treats negotiation as a key corporate competence, right? And
Right.
I asked the question you're asking me. I asked myself that question, and the short answer is, I don't think they realize they are consistently reaching suboptimal deals because they use the wrong metrics to measure the quality of the outcomes. And because in negotiation, as you know, the trick is that when you're negotiating, the value you can get out of the negotiation is hidden. I mean, the famous orange example, right, that everybody knows.
Right.
You split the orange in half, and the two girls may think, the two sisters that were fighting over the orange may think for the rest of their life that they really reached a good outcome. When if they had applied some of the basic techniques of negotiation, they could have reached a much better outcome. The one who wanted to make juice with the orange could have taken the pulp, and the one who wanted to make
Absolutely.
cake could have taken the peel. But that's hidden value. So I think that's the problem, that people don't realize that they're reaching suboptimal deals. And because they're reaching deals and because corporations see their executives reaching deals, they think they're negotiating well. So that has been my conclusion in the past years, trying to answer the question you just asked.
That's really a good point. Do you agree with that, Vlad?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it's fascinating how many times we consider any deal as a good deal and as a good outcome. And I think I think it comes from the fear of reaching uh, a, an outcome where we hear a no. We think
Right.
like we fear the no, and we consider it as a rejection, and we don't know what to do with that. We think like it's the end of story, and therefore we tend to do the compromises, and we do everything in order to just make any deal. And then when we made a deal, we say like, well, that's a victory, we made a deal.
Yeah.
And we don't realize that the experienced negotiators on the other end, they just negotiate a lot, and sometimes they even put you in a position when you lose, and you still kind of happy about making a deal that you get business and you hope that in the future it will be better. But the thing is, you need to focus on today. If you always focus on the future, you always get a suboptimal deal. And this fear of no, and actually fear of saying no is also huge. And because you think like, if you reject the deal, if you say no, it doesn't work for me, you fear that you break relationships. And then what you're gonna do, you cannot really, you need to fight for relationship, and people may get offended and such. So it's important to understand how to actually stand your ground without breaking relationships. This is the art. The other thing is people thinking that negotiation is a knowledge. It's like math. Like you get a knowledge and that's what you need. But negotiation is more of a a, a skill that you can compare to swimming or ballet or riding a bicycle. You cannot really teach negotiation on a seminar. You need to practice it. And if you don't practice it and you get into a tough situation, you just tend to forget all the techniques and you get back to your default, threatening and pushing each other by emotions and other things. Like all your wonderful knowledge goes, through the window, and you resort to really your habits. So negotiation is actually not a knowledge; it's a habit.
Negotiation, what's interesting is when people say, oh, I think, I had a good deal, right? And I always wonder, like, how do you know? How do you know that you have a good deal? You can't know, like when you sign, they give you a salary raise and you think, well, I had a 5% salary raise this year thanks to my performance. I think this is great. You can't tell, right? Because maybe they were willing to give you 10%, maybe somebody else had 7%. And I think, I was interviewing Lee Thompson, that I really love, at Kellogg, of course, Pablo. And something that I thought was extremely interesting, I was asking her a question about why do people suck at negotiating? Like, and I put myself in this, right? Why do people suck at negotiating? And she was saying it's because we never have a feedback loop. And so because we never have the feedback loop, we keep practicing and practicing and practicing. But we never improve because we never know what we did wrong. And so I think, that it's something that I particularly enjoy about teaching negotiation and having research workshops where people are actually doing, simulations, is that I can then lift the veil and I can say, this is what you could have gotten. And actually, a lot of times, people question whether they actually are a good negotiator because they realize, wait a minute, I thought I did great, but now that I'm seeing everybody's results, I didn't do that great. And so this is really the only way to learn. All right. So let's start with the first question. And I'd like, let's start with you, Pablo. What do you think about strategies for building rapport with a counterpart? So first, maybe how important is rapport with a counterpart when it comes to negotiating?
I think is perhaps the most critical phase of the negotiation, right? Or one of the most critical. There's other aspects that you have to take into account. Because finally, negotiation is about joint problem solving. And you're going to be much more effective at joint problem solving if you work collaboratively and you feel you trust the other person, you feel you can work with the other person. Just to give you some practical stories, I remember two that I think will make sense. We were negotiating with some gangs from the time of Pablo Escobar in Medellin. And the first thing that was something you had to take into account was their worldview is different than ours. And
Right.
We tend to assume that everybody's worldview is the same, right?
Yeah.
Or our worldview is better than others, right?
Yeah.
And I even remember, I come from a liberal background, and I had this idea that human rights are absolute. That's not true when you're in the Comuna 3 in Medellin. They don't share that view with you. So we were negotiating a situation in which these people were burning buses, and the owner hired us to help him. And the first thing we ask ourselves is, how do we find a way to build rapport with these people?
Right.
So there is a tradition in Medellin called natilleras. Natilleras is a long time tradition in which people get together and give money to like an informal bank during the whole year, and at the end of the year they do a raffle and they share that money, and that's done in a specific space, in a house or in a community center.
Right.
And we realized that meeting with the gang there would make them feel safe, and it was something we shared. The fact that the natillera was an institution that was respected by both sides was a way to create a safe space where we could start building trust.
Right.
And I think that was a shift in the negotiation. So that's one story. The other one I remember was when we were negotiating the free trade agreement between Colombia and the United States. We knew that this was going to be a long time negotiation. And one round of negotiation happened in a Latin American country, and the other round would happen somewhere in the US. Colombia was chosen for the first round, and we chose Cartagena. You may know Cartagena in the coast of Colombia as the place for the first round, because Cartagena is a great city, beautiful, that lends itself to going to great restaurants, going to sites that are fascinating. So the instruction we gave our negotiators, I remember, was, in this round, you cannot negotiate. All you need to do is build trust with the Americans. You have to take them dining, partying, dancing. You need to focus on building trust. And that was the single instruction we gave them. And they did that, and that played out during the next 2 years as a fundamental leverage to negotiation, because we had really good relationships with the American negotiators. We built personal relationships with the American negotiators. So when we had issues, we could go to the personal relationship. So that's another story that I think trust was fundamental. And of course, trust is built differently with different cultures, right? With what we call monochronic cultures. Trust is more about transparency, about delivering what you said you would deliver, about clarity. When you're working with, that's more the Anglo-Saxons, the Northern Europeans, the Scandinavians. And when you're working with polychronic cultures or high context cultures like Asians, Latin Americans, it's really about building those relationship bonds. I always bring the story from my first experience doing business in Japan, where, I wanted to get to the deal right away. And these Japanese people just kept on taking, dining, talking about our families. And I never got to talk about business, and I got really frustrated. But at the end, I understood that if I did not build that relationship context, with the business part would never arrive. So we took, maybe a year doing a deal that in maybe another culture, in an Anglo-Saxon culture, would have taken a month.
It kind of reminds me of this very famous negotiation activity, which is alpha versus beta, which is where you basically have classic. Right. And it's amazing. Like, I do it every single year with my students, where you have negotiation in groups, and one group is basically representing Japan and the other group is basically representing the US, and they're negotiating a very specific contract that was negotiating in the 80s. But so it's kind of like mimicking that. But they have very different cultures. And so, the Americans are always trying, like, they're talking over each other, they're being very aggressive and all that stuff. It's really fun. And I have to say, so first, before I say what I thought, when you were negotiating with gangs, so you were meeting them in person?
Yeah.
Were you scared by that?
Well, I guess I was, but we were working with someone who had a lot of experience relating with them. Actually, that person was the one who suggested we need to meet in a symbolic place that conveys collaboration traditionally. Right. So I felt safe because this lady seemed to be very knowledgeable, and
what was her background? Was she just a lawyer, or was she
No.
member?
She was a social worker that worked in the comunas for a long time, and she had experience with this.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that you're saying, that you kind of have to be careful about, not assuming they share the same values, right? I'm
absolutely.
assuming, right. That's a very interesting one. So I think, one thing that I find interesting about rapport is even in low context cultures, it's still important,
Yeah.
to a certain extent.
Mhm.
And I think it really speaks to the fact that we're not computers. Like, we're not just Excel sheets, trying to like match, and offer a supply and a demand or things like that. Um, and I feel that sometimes, we think a negotiation is just going to be about numbers, when in reality there is all of this work, that happened before, where if they like you, if they think you're trustworthy and you're a likable person and they want to keep you around, it's going to be such a different negotiation than, if they don't know you, they don't know if they can trust you, they're not even sure they want to keep you around. Vlad, do you have the same experience too?
Those are great points, and yeah, I completely support Pablo that it's very, very important to first build trust. So essentially,
Right.
in my mind, there are 4 steps of negotiation, and the first one is building relationships. So
Right.
when I was young and I lived in Russia, it was a time of the change in the government. It was
Right.
a kind of the turbulent time when there's a lot of people selling something on the street, and many of them were scammers, and they were trying to get your money and run with that. And there were some people who would just take it by force. So what my
Yeah.
mom was saying to me, she said, never buy anything on the street. Just always go to the store. Even if they offer you gold for nothing, just move past them and go to the store, buy what you need in the store. That's how trust is important. It's paramount. We cannot buy a cup of coffee without trust. Because,
Yeah.
if you didn't know what's inside the coffee, you would never buy it, right? You cannot cross the street because if you didn't trust the drivers that will stop on red and go on green, they will be a mess. So
So
yeah,
that's actually fascinating. This is maybe unrelated, but I mean, I think it's related. I'm going to tell you why. I was watching yesterday the news, and they were talking about this situation in Florida where this woman practiced as a dentist for like several months and was like messing up people's mouths. And people assumed, because she had like advertisements and a website and all that stuff, people assumed she was accredited. She had a license and that she was authorized to do so. And now she's in jail because she actually didn't have a license to practice. So we never think about it, but yeah, trust, it matters a great deal. Sometimes, we trust. People take classes at McGill because they trust, that the university will provide good education, right? And so all of that is extremely important. So what would be your first steps, like maybe Pablo, if you met somebody you've never met? How would you establish trust?
Well, nowadays, what I first do, and of course we have resources we did not have before, but I'm really, I mean, people, LinkedIn for me is a great resource. I always go on LinkedIn, connect to the person, invite them before the meeting if they're on LinkedIn, and try to find out, what they are, where they studied, and it goes a long way. If you went to the same university, you say, well, oh wow,
Yeah.
you Kellogg, how was your experience? Or if you have children, how are your children? So really find researching the person beforehand, for me it's key. And it's also, show me you know me, which is you also can show them that you are interested in them, which goes along,
Right.
and that you really made an effort to get to know them and to connect with them. So that's one way. When I'm going to negotiate across cultures, I always try to talk to somebody who has experience with that culture. I mean,
Right.
there is this generic approach about polychronic, monochronic, high context, low
Right.
context. But cultures are very subtle, right? And there's
Yeah.
regional cultures and there is subgroups. So I always try to talk to people who have negotiated or interacted with this specific person, this specific company, or this specific culture. Especially, I want to know, how do you show respect in that culture, right?
Right.
And that goes a long way, and it's very easy to do. I mean, those are simple resources everybody has at hand. Then, of course, comes the interaction, and then I adapt. I try to adapt my style to their style,
Right.
and that's where, for example, polychronic and monochronic comes to hand. You have to be careful because with monochronic cultures, if you get too personal, it might backfire, right?
Can you explain the distinction, maybe for people who might not
Yeah.
know it?
So monochronic people are less relational. They're more, let's talk about business. Time is money. They trust you if you're transparent. They trust you if you said you were going to do something and you did it. If you're punctual, they trust you. If they're impunctual, it goes the other way. High context cultures, polychronic cultures are more relational. They will want to build some type of connection with you, even if you're doing a short-term deal. They need that feeling that you're building connections with them. And they will. I mean, with Japanese is amazing. Sometimes I never do business with these people, and years after we keep connected, we just become friends, right? So you have to adapt yourself, and you have to be careful because I am polychronic. I'm relational. I love to find connections. That sort of backfires sometimes with very monochronic people. They say, "Why are you asking me personal questions? This is a business meeting," and you see the reaction. With polychronic people, high context people like Asians, Latin Americans, Middle Easterns, that personal connection is fundamental, and you don't want to move forward. As Vlad was saying, there is phases in the negotiation. Vlad used 4, we use 7, but for me, once you start interacting, the first phase is building trust, and I have this idea that when you're negotiating, and this comes from Fisher, you focus on the process, not on the outcome. And so I don't move to the next phase until I feel that the trust is there, that there's really some type of connection. And I agree with you, even with monochronic cultures, those human connections still very important. Maybe not to the extent that they are important to high context culture, but you still want those personal connections. They still work. And what I try to do is make sure that before I go into discovery or information exchange, however you want to call it, to find that hidden value, the relationship is there. And once you have the relationship there, is wonderful. I mean, that's why grifters are so good.
Of course.
They build trust, and once they build trust, this person believes anything, and that's how.
And sometimes they can build trust over several months. If you look at romance scammers, they don't ask you anything for a few months, and then suddenly it's like, oh, I'm stuck abroad, I can't join you, I need a flight, I need a plane ticket, and progressively, because you're so involved. And
I was taking advantage, and this highlights the importance of relationship. I'm a biker, and I was biking with a friend, and we met a guy on the road, and we started talking, and we spent like 2 hours biking with him, and then we were done, and we were talking, and he was asking, and all of a sudden he said, "Oh, my son is here. Let me introduce you to my son." And he says, "Oh, my son wants to buy a bike like yours. Can he try it?" To make the story short, he stole the bike.
Yeah, of course.
Because this guy trusted him so much, he gave them the bike. Yeah. So trust is extremely powerful. And of course, you have to be careful. Sometimes you have to know who you trust. Vlad said something which is key. I'm a strong believer in showing yourself vulnerable. When I teach, I always start with personal stories, so they see me as someone who makes the same mistakes they make, someone approachable. But you also have to be careful with to whom you give trust, because you cannot give trust to anybody. They have to earn it, right? And you have to make sure that you can trust them. So you have to be careful also that you don't end up trusting people you should not be trusting.
Right. So we have a really, really good comment, and then so you can answer it. I'm just going to display it. In your experience, are there significant differences between people, culture, and business culture in any given country or region? So before I let you, thank you, Mike, for the question. And yeah, I mean, there are huge differences. There are huge variabilities. Think of it as height. If you go to China, the average height is lower than if you go to the US or to the Netherlands. I know they're very tall in the Netherlands, but it doesn't mean every single Chinese person is shorter. than every single person in the US. And at the same time, it doesn't mean that they don't have 6'4", like people who are 6'4" in China. So every time, you have a lot of variabilities and all of these differences in culture. For example, I'm writing this paper right now on individualism and collectivism. It's not because you're in China that everybody is more collectivistic. Sometimes people can be more individualistic there, but in average, they're more collectivistic in China, more individualistic in the US. Vlad, do you want to answer that question? You have international experience from Russia and now from the US. Do you see differences as well?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And yes, I did have a culture shock when I came to the US. And that culture shock was from the beliefs of what is the value. And as Pablo mentioned rightfully about the values and similarity in values, the people could have similarity in values in specific places and specific communities. People may share values, and that creates unity. And people may share different values. So, for example, what would be valued in Russia, like I believe that we mentioned before that in the US people are more assertive, they're kind of
Right.
talk over each other. Imagine that and multiply it 10 times, so you'll get the culture in Russia. So people are super assertive, they interrupt each other all the time. Sometimes they talk bidirectional, so that's fine. And people when I go to Egypt, I feel like sometimes people yell at each other, and no, they're just discussing when the car is arriving or something like that. And I'm scared, like I feel anxiety, like the fight is about to break out. But no, they're just discussing what they're going to have for dinner, and that's not a big deal. So you kind of need to understand what people value and what's okay, what's not okay with them. And essentially, it's sort of a set of agreements between people. A culture is a set of agreements, and people may have different agreements between each other. And
Yeah.
sometimes it's not obvious. So when you join a new company, for example, it's very it's mundane example because we all do join different companies as a contractor, as a consultant, as an employee, as a partner. First, we need to understand what people value, what's important for
Right.
them, how they operate. You need to kind of learn the culture and kind of just explore it and see. Maybe it rubs you the wrong way, but it's not that you can start and influencing them right away because um, that culture creates safety. And essentially, if you start shifting elements, then it may create anxiety and it may create some agitation about on people, and they start to see you as an outsider. So back to the conversation about rapport. It's a very good question how to build rapport first, and I think the most important thing is not to break rapport.
Right.
When you break rapport, oftentimes if people start to rob each other in their own way,
Right.
and then it just doesn't click. And if it doesn't click, people kind of trying to make it click in their own way. So there's as an example, it's a very interesting short movie called It's Not About the Nail. I don't know if you saw that or not. The bottom line is this: there's a woman there, and she is talking to her husband, probably or boyfriend, and she was talking about how she feels bad, and it appears to be a nail right in her head. And this
Right.
guy is saying like, well, let's just take it out. You have a
Yeah.
nail in your head. And she's like, it's not about the nail. You don't understand me. You just don't listen to me. You need to listen. You always try to fix me, but you never
Yeah.
listen to me. And that's very true because like for many people, it may sound like she's wrong, but she's
But to
actually right.
her,
Yeah, but
yeah.
the thing is, she's absolutely right. If you think from negotiators' perspective, she's absolutely right. And the reason is because we cannot solve any problem unless we are in a good emotional state.
Right.
When we are scared, we have fear, when we are not comfortable, we are focusing on something is wrong, you want to escape that first. We're looking for escape route. We cannot solve problems, especially as big as the nail in your head that needs to be taken out. And any suggestion, any advice would be kind of like against rapport, essentially. It will be
Yeah.
no rapport there. So from this perspective, the first thing you need to focus is nurturing. And the nurturing
Yeah.
is a wonderful concept. I believe that I read about this first in the gym camps, Start With No. And I think this is a wonderful tool that, gets you through thick and thin in any negotiation, as long as you have a habit of applying that.
Right.
I will stop here because Jane, I feel like you want to comment on something.
No. I mean, I think that's extremely interesting. And I have to say, when you were talking about the various differences, between cultures and not making assumptions, it made me think about this story. So I'm French. I'm from France. And now I live in Quebec. I was at NYU for a few years, and there was this professor that I like a lot. I'm not going to say her name. It doesn't matter. But I like her a lot. And she had spent like her sabbatical year at INSEAD in France. And then she told me, well, French people are super rude, and I told her, okay. I was like, why? Like, what makes you think that? And then she said, well, I remember I was just moving in and I needed some salt. So I knocked at my neighbor's door and they were like offended that I was just presenting unannounced, and kind of like asking for something right away. And they were very rude to me. And I said to her, I was like, yeah, I mean, you show up unannounced. Like, that's not a French thing to do. You need we don't know you. Like, nobody knows you. And it's interesting because there are these differences. When I moved here, I know I had like a couple of comments from people that, I would run into at the store or something who would say, you never say hi to us. And I was telling them, I was like, I don't know you. Like, we're in the same street, but why am I supposed to say hi to strangers? But so it's kind of like this thing, never make assumptions and judge people from your own frame of reference, assuming that the whole world, has the same frame of reference. People have also, there's a billion ways to be a human, right? Not just one way. And so, I don't know. I guess in France, we don't say hi to people we don't know, and we don't say hi to people in the street. But it's very different. You go to Italy, for example, it's very different, So it's just kind of like how it is. I have a question for you guys, which is a topic that I find fascinating, which is the topic of lying. And I like to ask this question to people who do training for negotiators and all that stuff. I have noticed over the past 10 years, teaching negotiation at McGill, I have noticed that roughly 10, 15%, maybe 20% of people have grown to use lying as a conflict resolution method. So they basically, it starts with the dog ate my homework, and then it works for them. And then they start using that, kind of like as lying. And I'm saying that because every time I do a workshop for different crowds at McGill, executives, MBAs, undergrads, or outside of McGill, I always have people who say, oh, during this simulation, am I allowed to lie? And it always shocks me because I'm always thinking, that's so weird that somebody would be asking this. But so what do you think about lying and rapport? Maybe Pablo, do you want to go?
Yeah, sure. Well, that's a good one. And that's also, as you say, cultural. I mean, there are things that maybe some cultures will consider as lying that other cultures won't consider as lying. For example, in competitive bargaining, when you are exaggerating the price you claim you're willing to buy or sell something for. And that dynamic that we call it in Spanish cañar or bluffing in English, that's acceptable. People do it, and that's part of the ritual, right? That's one way to look at it. The other way to look at it, of course, is, well, lying is destructive, and you can be manipulated if you believe something that's not true. So again, what I think works for me is to research a lot the person I'm going to negotiate with, find out what their reputation is, talk to other people who have negotiated with them, There is techniques about lying. I forget the book right now, but it's called, I think, Lying in Relationships and Business Relationships and Love Relationships. And there's a lot of very sophisticated techniques, popular, dilation, some that can be useful, the rhythm of the language, stuff like that.
Altering.
Yeah.
That kind of stuff.
Yeah, that kind of stuff. So I think for me, what works a lot is really knowing who I'm going to negotiate with, and of course, including things in the agreement like due diligence. I mean, okay, I'll trust everything you say, but at the end, I'm going to have some lawyers or some accountants go and look at what you told me was true to see if it's true, and if it's not true, well, we'll adjust the agreement accordingly, or the agreement, or we will not have an agreement. Other techniques that I think work for me, that I love, is probably my favorite technique. And you were talking about Lee Thompson, her colleague Victoria Medvec came up with this. It's called multiple equivalent simultaneous offers. You're familiar with that, of course.
Yeah.
And I found that that's a really good tool to check people.
It's really hard to lie. Yeah, it's really hard to lie in that context.
To lie with mesos, you can lie about your interest, and in some context, people cannot tell you their interests because their interests are not legitimate, and that happens in some negotiations. So they will lie about their interests, but they won't lie about what they like. So once you make a proposal, they won't say they don't want this when they do want it. So using proposals to do fact checking is a very good technique. I mean, we cannot go into mesos right now, but you can read. There's a lot of information. If you go on the web, you can read about mesos. I think that's one of my favorite techniques in negotiation. I think it does so many things, and I use it for fact checking.
Excellent, thank you. So Mike, maybe I'm sorry, Vlad. There is a question from Michel. He's written as Mike, but it's Michel Poitras on YouTube. So question for all of you. What would be the most important advice you would give before undertaking any international intercultural negotiations? So what would you say, Vlad, to that?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And I was thinking, how would I negotiate in different countries? Like when I go to Russia or Egypt, where I've been, what would be different? And I think that it's important to understand what people value in their culture, and having a person from that culture would help a lot. On your side would help a lot. And I will tell you a story. One time I was in Egypt, and I was about to meet my friend from Russia who was supposed to go to a hotel somewhere in Sharm el-Sheikh and stay there. And he said, let's meet together. And I said, well, okay, sounds good. I will meet you in the lobby. Assuming it is easy to get to the lobby, as easy as in the United States or in Canada, wherever. So you walk in and go to the lobby and you sit and you wait your friend, but not in Egypt. In order to get to the lobby, you actually need to bypass the gate, and the gate is right on the street. Like you need to walk another, 200-300 meter, meter, in feet it will be longer. But you need to walk to the lobby, and at the gate there is a security guard, and security guard says, well, are you from this hotel? And
are you a customer? Yeah,
and I say, no, I'm meeting a friend. And he's like, okay, well, you cannot go. And I say, well, I don't have a phone to call. Like, how do we meet? And he's like, I don't care. You cannot go. And I say, well, maybe I can give you a passport or whatever. And he's like, no, it doesn't work for me, and you cannot go. And it sounds like he doesn't care. And maybe he picked up my negativity and like my frustration about this. And he was like adamant, no, you cannot go, and that's it. So the taxi driver who brought me there, they start to speak in Arabic, and again, it started to feel like they're about to fight to me. And then this guard let me go, and he said that somebody will go walk with you, and then walk back. And when I gotten back, the driver said that he simply said to him that he was put in this place not to open the gate and close the gate. He was put there to make decisions And this is the time when he needed to make that decision.
Right. That's extremely interesting.
And knowing that, knowing the culture and knowing what really, it's kind of like a guilt trip. So he is
Right.
actually showing him like he's not doing his job.
Right.
And knowing that culture, that you actually lean into that and you can actually, assert yourself, you're being more assertive in that culture, actually helps. Helps in the United States. I would say it may backfire if you start to guilt trip someone and say like you're not doing your job because your job is to do this and this and this. People will get offended. In the United States, actually, it would be more advisable to say, I'm a good person. This is my passport. I have intent to just meet my friend. How could you help me? And people are very helpful. They would be willing to, build a reputation of this hotel and help you in that situation. They would give a call or they would do something about it.
Right.
But in Egypt, you gotta push people a little bit to get through. So answering that question, I would say it's best to have somebody from that culture on your side if you can, or maybe consult with them, or maybe consult the aftermatch, because you always can come back and renegotiate later. Or in most cases, in my case, I could not. I would just leave and miss that meeting with my friend. But that's extremely helpful.
That's extremely interesting. What about you, Pablo? How would you answer that question? So what would be the most important advice you would give before undertaking any international / intercultural negotiations?
I completely agree with Vlad in this. The simplest and the cheapest advice is talk to someone who has negotiated with them. That's easy. On the other hand, you said it. If you did your statistics course, there's normal distributions.
Right.
So be careful with stereotypes. Individuals are still individuals, and you'll be surprised how globalized a lot of people have become. So they will adapt. They will adapt to you more than you can expect. So always keep in mind that what advice you're given is some general advice to have a heads up, right? Be careful with this, because with French, you need to be introduced before you ask for the salt.
Yeah.
but some French are not like that. Some French. They'll open the door and they'll be happy that you were spontaneous. So
they're not going to be like, "What do you want? Who are you?"
The other thing that's tricky, and I've learned that too, is know your culture. I think the more sophisticated way to become culturally savvy is to see your own cultural lens. And of course, you discover your cultural lens by interacting with other cultures. And the no-brainers to you, well, they're the logic to others. What seems ridiculous to you may be very important to them, or what you think is logical to you may be offensive or ridiculous to them. So you have to learn your own cultural lens, and you have to decide how much you want to adapt. At some point in my life, I decided to become a full vegetarian. Now I'm a flexitarian, but I was full vegetarian. And I went to Argentina to teach for McGill, actually. And I knew that the restaurant, the final event would be a big meat dinner. So my question is, what do I do? Do I eat meat? Or do I tell them I don't eat meat? I know I offend the Argentinians who think that meat is the best thing on earth. So I had to plan to make sure that I got fish, because I wasn't willing to eat meat. So that's it. In general, you also have to think, do I want to adapt to this? Can I adapt to this? Because you cannot always adapt. And unfortunately, because you are the one who's supposed to be culturally savvy, you cannot expect other people to adapt to you. In general, in cultural settings, you are the one who has to adapt, because the other person is not seeing the cultural differences.
Right.
The only one that can adapt is you, and you have to decide whether you're willing to do so or not.
Yeah, because they're immersed in their environment, right? You go to a different country, and you're from a different culture. They're immersed in their environment. This is how things are done here, and that's how you see, by the way, in a lot of organizations as well. I advise sometimes people who try to submit a new course. at McGill or are trying to get into a program at McGill, just explaining to them how things work, right? How people make decisions, what they pay attention to. It's always striking to me to see that unless you know, right, how things are done at McGill, and it's the same for every single organization, unless you know how things are done, you're never going to get anything done. Like nothing is going to work because you're going to arrive with your own frame of reference and you think things should be happening a certain way, but it doesn't matter because the people who are immersed in their culture, they have their own formula of how things are done and what's expected and all that stuff. Then you really have to be matching all of this. That's extremely interesting, and thank you so much to Michelle for sending that. So let's see. There is a question I wanted to you, and it's what if you realize that you didn't approach a negotiation properly? You were maybe culturally insensitive, and the negotiation has grown maybe contentious or maybe even hostile. How would you address this? So maybe Vlad, do you want to go first?
Yeah, absolutely. So essentially, the trust starts from respect, and if the conversation becomes contentious, or we can say unsafe, first of all, you need to look at whether it is still respectful or not.
Right.
And essentially, people tend to react to the unsafe conversations where they are not comfortable in two ways. I mean, I say tend to because there are other ways, but the most common ways are whether they become silent and they
Right.
withdrawing themselves from the conversation, or they become aggressive, they become compelling. They try to
Right.
compel you into what they
Because
mean.
they're frustrated, right? They're frustrated, so they become like aggressive a lot of times.
Well, we all may get frustrated,
Right.
and getting aggressive or getting silent is just two habits,
Right.
and those habits are developed through our childhood when we try to get away with what we want, and we were not taught negotiation. We didn't experience. We don't know how to do this, and we
No.
learn our own way, and we pick up habits from our brothers and sisters, and maybe even parents, and maybe some people from the kindergarten, whatever, and we look how they get away, and well, naturally, when you are a child, people, parents pay more attention to you, and they give you what you want just because you scream. So
Yeah.
sometimes we just, well, not sometimes, but we all keep those habits. Like habits are very hard to, to, to get rid of. And we get to those habits and we started to show our emotions.
Right.
Maybe we are not screaming, but we start to, frown. We raise our voices. We start to tap on the table like this,
Mm.
or we start to show the fist somehow it leaks out in your body language. Right. and
Right.
and that creates that pressure, and that sounds aggressive, and the experienced negotiator needs to be able to read those signs. So other people who are shy as a child, they shy away, they stop asking questions, they stop talking, they seem to be disengaged, they may start to look out of the window, or do something on the phone, or maybe they just say, oh, I have another meeting,
I gotta go.
sorry, I gotta go. And you gotta understand that you need to bring safety back.
Right.
It's the first thing, and the first thing to bring safety back is bringing respect back, and respect is very important. So if there is no respect, there is no trust, and there is no trust, there is no business. So everything starts from respect, and respectful communication is the cornerstone of negotiation. Even if you are not friends, even if you are adversaries, you still can respect each other, and you still can have a respectful agreement. So respect is the fix first. So if you see that the conversation becomes disrespectful, you need to fix that. And if you see people are getting aggressive, you need to bring it up and say, well, let's set this aside for a second. what I have noticed is in our conversation, we started to raise voice and we started to call names. How
Right.
can we get back to a place of respect? Uh, would it be against to talk about how we actually talking and discussing things? Because it's very important. So this is one thing. If people get silent, you actually need to be noticing that, and you start to say, okay, let's set this aside. Did I say something that was against your
Yeah.
values? You kind of need to, this is where you come across aggressive, and you need to check with them what's going on and if you need to fix it. You may apologize, because if you came across disrespectful, you can say, oh, I apologize. I didn't realize that I knocked your door and disturbed you.
Yeah.
And sometimes people get aggressive with you, like, what do you want? Who are you?
Yeah.
And you realize, like, they probably defensive. This is their reaction. You
Because
need to
it's
say,
unusual for them, maybe. Like, just nobody does that, and so they're surprised.
exactly. And you say, oh, I realize I need to apologize. I did something wrong, and that was not my intent. And a very good technique here is called contrasting. Contrasting is a very simple, it's called don't do statement. And and it's very effective because it gives you a contrast and it is clarifying your intent. And you may
Right.
say, I didn't want to disturb you. I wanted to, I wanted to stop by and introduce myself. I wanted to
Right.
make a connection. And when people see that your intent is not selfish and is not short term, you're going to extract something from them, then they understand your intent, and then they accept you, and they may even guide you, and they may say, it's not really accustomed here to do something like that, but we understand.
Yeah, no, that's actually a really, really good point. And I think it really speaks to the fundamental attribution error, which is we tend to attribute people's behavior to who they are instead of just their context, such as their culture. But we're really, really quick as humans to say, oh, he spoke that way because he's rude, right? Instead of he spoke that way because culturally that's not something people do in that country. He was very surprised, right? So maybe last question, same to you, Pablo, how would you deal with a negotiation where people are getting upset or it's getting contentious or hostile? How would you salvage it?
Mm, I think that I like one model I really like from I forgot the name of the author, famous is Never Split the Difference. He talks about tactical empathy.
Chris Voss.
I think he coined something that is very powerful and comes from other disciplines. But I'm a profound believer in that. I mean, the first thing you have to give people is your full presence. So I remember particularly we were dealing with a large crowd around an infrastructure project, and they were so angry because the government hadn't consulted with them because they felt disrespected. That was fundamental.
Yeah.
And all I did was use something that comes from Canada, which is the talking stick.
Okay.
I didn't have a talking stick, so I used a microphone, and I said, look, the only thing we are here to listen to your concerns. This is the main purpose. And the only thing I ask you is only the person who has a microphone can talk.
Right.
I started to give the microphone to the first person, and they vented and they said we were horrible. And every time they said something, they said, you didn't bring an overpass in front of the school, and our children are going to be in accidents. So I wrote on the whiteboard, you're concerned about the safety of your children. And I kept on doing this. And by the 10th person, you could see how they had calmed down. Because as I was saying, all I was doing is showing them respect and recognition. I was acknowledging what was important to them. So this idea of, give them your full presence, the beginner's mind, be really curious, don't avoid the negative attribution, really try to see where they're coming from. Empathy, paraphrase, show them that you understand and you care. It's so powerful and it's so simple. So that's where I always go to when I see that the situation is difficult. Of course, it's not always easy to do. With my teenager, sometimes I want to kill him, so I have to go back and say, okay.
I hate you. Yeah.
But it's still the same technique with your wife, with your teenager,
yeah,
with an angry public. it's very powerful. Be present, be curious, be empathetic, and it works very well.
Because I'm assuming, right, when you deal with a crowd that's angry, they're all trying to say basically the same thing. Like there's just like five things, right, that they're upset about. But you were talking about the overpass, it's going to be difficult for children. If they're all screaming that, you know, if you give like a stick to someone and you say, and they say it once, and then somebody else says it when they have the stick, I'm assuming you have like 50 people in the room who just like put back their hand down because they're thinking, like two people already said it, you know, so now they know. But I think, you know, it's very, very interesting. I know for me, like, you know, I'm a president of a co-owner association, unfortunately. And so there's a lot of emotions, you know, when you have like, it's basically just dealing with conflicts. Like that's all it is, a co-owner association. But I'm always a big believer whenever somebody approaches me with a seemingly impossible negotiation, right? Something where it's impossible to save, or it's impossible to convince them otherwise, or all that kind of stuff. I always think there is a way, and there's actually multiple ways. You know, there are millions of ways that are terrible, but there are specific ways. There are specific things you can say and processes you can go through that can salvage this negotiation. Yeah. So you have to think about, you know, how do I do that, right? The people who would succeed there, how would they do? So I think, you know, we're reaching the end of, my cat is coming and saying hi. We're reaching the end of today's session. You guys, thank you so much for making time for us. This is extremely valuable. If you're in the crowd, if you're in the attendance, you know, you're watching us on LinkedIn, you're watching us on YouTube, please follow Pablo and Vlad on LinkedIn. The links are posted in the box so you can follow them. I'm not going to be here next week because next week I'm teaching a workshop all week, but I'll be here in 2 weeks with a new version of Master Negotiators. I'm going to implement some changes. You guys, I hope to see you soon. It was great connecting with you. I wish you a really, really good one.
Thank you. That was
fun.
You.
And whatever questions we didn't get a chance to address, I'm willing to address. So I see some questions still there.
Right.
Thank you so much, Diane. Please connect and send me those questions. I will be happy to address them. There's more.
Yeah, and also I think, you know, Vlad, you wanted to talk about a workshop, right?
Well, I have free master classes, and if you would like, you can check them out on my website, businessrelationshipscoach.com. There are 3 workshops there, and whoever gets on the workshop, sign up today and joins those workshops, they will get access to my online course about reflective listening, which is the primary way to build rapport and trust with people, applying those reflective listening. Thank you.
That's amazing. Thank you. You guys, I wish you a great week. Thank you so much for making time for us. Have a good one, everybody.
Thank you for having us. Bye-bye.
Take care.